to the 2020 Empowerment Conference. Hello from the exec team.
My name is Josh Foster, co-founder and CEO.
And I'm Sherron Pearson, co-founder and CTO.
And my name is Marquita Ahmad, the editor-in-chief. We're excited to share this dynamic panel with you today.
Please feel free to take notes and join us in the live breakout room to debrief after the panel concludes.
Welcome. My name is Sherron Pearson, and this is the 2020 Empowerment Conference. Thank you for joining us today. We have Akintunde, Ahmad, and we also have Chelsea Miller. And today we're discussing leadership and what it takes to be a leader and how to make leadership effective for you, your lifestyle, and your business. Chelsea, can you take a moment to briefly explain to us all a little bit about who you are and the projects that you're currently working on?
Absolutely. So hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Miller. I am an activist and social entrepreneur. So I have two ventures, and they're in the space of activism and social impact. One of them is Freedom March NYC, which is a youth-led nonviolent protest group out in New York City that's been mobilizing after the George Floyd protests about thinking about sustainable policy change, in addition to the protesting that we've been doing in New York, as well as Women Everywhere Believe, which is a national leadership pipeline for women and girls of color. And we're across 8 states and 20 plus universities, with actually recently a chapter in India, which is really interesting. And so we provide leadership trainings for girls of color. We provide annual conferences and really just development opportunities to continue to make sure that they are not only entering the workforce, but also thriving and growing in that space.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to unpack some of those projects later on in the panel. And Tunde, can you give us a little bit of information on who you are and what we can see you're working on?
No problem. So, right, my name is Akintunde Ahmad. I go by Tunde. I'm born and raised in Oakland, California, which is where I currently am. Just so happened that COVID-19 put me back here, but I'm very fortunate to be here because it opened up a lot of doors for what I'm doing right now. So, currently, I am an Ida B. Wells Fellow with Type Investigations, which is an investigative journalism fellowship. I'll be doing this for the next year. My focus is actually on police misconduct within the Oakland Police Department. And so if you know about Oakland, but really any city in the United States, you know the legacy of policing and police misconduct and its foundations. And so this whole year, I'll be spending actually looking at the past 2 decades of the Oakland Police Department with specific detail to its negotiated settlement agreement, which is like a federal consent decree, and why they're under this federal monitor 20 years later still. In addition to that, I just started on a film about the national anthem as an associate producer. It's very early stages, so I won't talk too much about it, but those are my main 2 things that I'm focusing on right now. Yeah, that's it.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like you guys are both, have a focus a little bit on social justice and police misconduct or at least police reform. Chelsea and Tunde, where do your lead origin stories begin?
I could go first this time since Chelsea went first the last time. Let's see. I guess on a national scale, I was one of those students so I am a journalist, documentary filmmaker, amongst other things, but I just finished up journalism school. And so one of the things that happens annually is that there are these stories about students, Black and brown students who come from underrepresented backgrounds and make their ways to top universities. And so it's literally like a genre of media story right now where you say, look at this student who's from this background, look at the odds they beat, and look, now they're going to this top university or they're in this top program. And so when I was in high school, I was that student for Oakland. And so I came out of the Oakland Public School District and I got put on a pedestal of like, okay, look at this student from Oakland and look, they're headed to this Ivy League university. And that's what I think kind of put me in a spotlight, that it wasn't necessarily something that I asked for or wished for, but it did come with a responsibility and a leadership role of like, okay, you have a lot of eyes on you, whether you like it or not. And you have to kind of move forward in life knowing that this is kind of like something that you'll be known as. So what are you going to do when you have this attention? And so it was twofold for me. On one hand, I wanted people to know that, yes, like out of these public schools, out of these inner city environments, this is the type of, students that are coming out of these environments that are on a regular basis, but what should be more regular if people actually dump more resources and more time and investment into our community. So my whole thing of like kind of retelling my story and getting people to understand is that this media story of thrusting people up and it kind of fits into that mentality of like, oh, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, y'all can do it too. And I'm kind of reframing that of like, we shouldn't be exceptional students just for going to college out of these backgrounds. We should actually be shedding light on what did you expect from us, that this is a newsworthy story that propelled me all the way to the Ellen show amongst a whole bunch of other stages. And why is that exceptional in the first place? What do you think of Black and brown youth that are coming from these inner cities, that this is something that gets hundreds and thousands of views on YouTubes and hundreds of thousands of reads when it comes to that? And so I said all that to say, I think that's where my origin story started, because I came with like a lot of responsibility to actually rebrand a narrative that was kind of constructed and put upon me that didn't really fit into what, my life goal and purpose is. And it's really to shed more light on all of these structural injustices that are based on race, that, make my story significant to some in the first place. And I feel like that may have been a bit of a tangent from the question, because I kind of thought about this and I was like, where does lead origin story kind of originate? But that's what I kind of think of it as.
No, I think that's excellent. And I do have one quick follow-up. So you mentioned that you essentially had all eyes on you once you, were accepted into this elite Ivy League institution, having come from a public school in Oakland. Do you feel as though the leadership role that was essentially thrusted upon you, did that come naturally for you, or did you have to learn how to handle that responsibility?
I mean, I think it was definitely something I had to learn how to handle. Because I was somebody who did well in school academically, but I wasn't necessarily somebody who was used to speaking out on issues. I mean, I come from a family that is very much, some may say radical or whatever, but very much involved in the Black Power movement. Like, my name is Akintunde Ahmad. I'm not Nigerian, nor that. You get my point. Like, this is the type of family I come from, who names their kids these type of names and goes up in this type of culture. And so I definitely had to adjust. And so, like my friend group, so I still hang out with today and things, and just the way that I was raised wasn't something that necessarily prepared me to be on any type of local or national stage to be speaking out against these issues. And so it was just kind of learning on the fly, and kind of, I'm educating myself in the process. At the time, I'm 17 years old, and it's not something I was super actively thinking about, but as I learned and reflected, it kind of, coming into my own skin in a way.
Do you feel as though you were surrounded by leaders that cultivated that support system for you during this time, by way of your parents or maybe your peers? Did you have anyone that served as a role model in this time, or did you find yourself having to just learn on your own more so?
I feel like it was a lot of learning on my own. I mean, this is something I speak about like often, but I had 3 of my 4 brothers have been incarcerated at one time. When I made these national headlines and stuff, like my brother was serving 4 years in federal prison. I didn't see him until into my sophomore year of college. And so it really wasn't like I was from a background with a whole bunch of nurturing community. No, but I did have, I was very fortunate to even have both of my parents in my life and grow up in a 2-parent household and things like that, which definitely played a major role in this. But at the same time, I from an area, from a school district that doesn't necessarily connect us to all of these resources. And so that's one of the things also that I'm working on now, of like, how different can people's outcomes be when they're connected with different resources. And that's why the work that Chelsea is doing with We Believe is so important, because it's like, you get to a point and you're like, wow, this is all the access to opportunity that I could have had when I was younger. If only I would have had somebody to tell me this or mentor me in this way, I would have not wasted 2 years trying to figure it out by myself. You know what I'm saying? And you learn, of course, from everything, but it's one of those things that if you would have had someone to tell you up front and mentor you, it would have been very, very different. And so I'll leave it at that.
Chelsea, can you let us in on the origin story for your leadership journey?
Yeah, that is a great question. So it's actually funny because Tunde's response made me, I guess, okay, so I'll back up. I guess Tunde kind of started with high school. I'll start a little bit before that because it definitely, at least for me, was really important. So I was raised by a single mom. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm first generation American. My family's actually from Jamaica. And so I am one of 6 siblings. And so for me, like, women's empowerment has always been really important, just because I've always seen my mom do everything. And I think in that way, you just learn how to navigate the world and recognize kind of like, what does it mean when we're talking about like gender inequality? What's it mean when we're talking about racism? Like, I remember when I was young and like I always needed like my big sister or someone, like when I'm going to the store, it's like, go to the store with me. Why? Because there would be like older men that would be like catcalling. It's kind of like from a safety perspective, like I couldn't be like my other guy friends in my apartment who could just be out late, right? It's like you have to go inside. And then on that second point, I think reflecting on having to travel like an hour to get to a different school district, because my mom actually put me and my siblings in another school district because of the same exact thing that Tunde is talking about, like the resources, right? She was like, okay, if I'm going to make sure that they have the opportunities that they need in order to excel, then we're going to have to figure out where we can find those opportunities. And so for me, I just remember being like really young and like going to a predominantly white school and always trying to figure out, why did Susie live right across the street and her mom always come, to pick her up, and I would have to like wait on the bus, walk over to the bus stop, and then like it would take me like an hour to get home. By the time I get home, Susie already did her homework and is, like going on play dates with the other kids that are on the block who also go to the school, and so like feeling that kind of like disconnect. And so I think for me in that way, like my education has always been really important because I've recognized kind of like the sacrifice of that. But also understanding that like, similar to what Tunde is saying, like, why is it that this is exceptional? Why is this something that more of us don't have access to, and why is it that we have to fight so hard to get access to that? And I think in doing so, a lot of research, a lot of understanding, a lot of grappling with my own experiences. And so when I got to high school, actually, I pitched this idea to, I think I was like 15 or 16 at the time, which to this day is still so crazy to me. I pitched this idea to this principal in East New York to do a summer program for girls that were like in 4th and 5th grade in the community. And she gave me full responsibility for them for 8 weeks. Mind you, I was like 16. And I was like, this is great. Like I came up with a curriculum. Like, at that point I had just came back from Burma because I did a program over there for women's leadership development. And I was like, I was just in Burma, so I think that I can definitely, like help with doing like programming for the girls. And at that point, they didn't have any programs for the girls in the school, like education-wise, mentorship. And I think it was really important for them to see me, right, in this space of like, I'm from the same community as you. This is my experiences. These are the things that I have learned, and kind of just like imparting it on the next generation. And so when I got to college, kind of fast forward to that, ended up going to Columbia University. And when I was at Columbia, I actually took off a semester to work at the White House. I worked during the Obama administration on criminal justice reform and urban economic opportunities. So kind of the intersections of where you're talking about race, economics, like everything kind of just goes into that category, because our department was domestic policy. So it was like education, everything. And so during the final days of the Obama White House, really understanding like what we're talking about when we say movement work, what we're talking about when we say being on the ground and mobilizing from like the grassroots, but also like understanding the importance of like having powerful and understanding leadership when it comes to doing this work. And so for me, after the White House in 2016, just really geared up on my activism through We Believe, through just everything that I've been doing as a public speaker, as the social impact strategist, worked at a company for a while in social impact strategy until going full-time on my own ventures. And so a lot of what I've done is honestly from a place of just feeling called to do it and understanding the importance of taking up this space, like as a Black woman with these experiences, and making sure that I am leaving the door open for other people behind me. And so, whereas with Tunde, his start was kind of like trying to figure out, okay, I'm in the middle of this media storm. What do I do now? For me, it was kind of reversed, because now is when we're getting a lot of national attention, which is kind of crazy, because it's like we've been doing this work, like, you know, and it's like now because of, I guess, the world paying attention to these issues, that's when companies want to throw money, that's when news outlets want to cover, oh, look at these youth-led nonviolent protests taking place in New York City. And it's like, no, like Black youth have like always been either a part of movements. If you look at the age that Martin Luther King even started, right? Like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, like all of those just movements from like historically have been led by like youth, you know? And so in that same way, the work that we're doing isn't new. It's the fact that y'all have just decided to pay attention. And so like, shout out to all the outlets, the CNN, whatever, who have really been doing a good job of covering the protests and being in conversation with activists on that work. But I think that in that same way, there's still just so much work that needs to be done. And I'm really passionate about social entrepreneurship, because I think that this is a lane for us to really think about how do we build businesses and sustainable ways of creating impact.
Well said. So I think that's interesting to point to for all of the audience members listening, is that regardless of your start, you can eventually get there if you're motivated to do the work. As we touched on earlier, leadership can come in many different forms, and they all typically have a foundation in our unique life experiences. Tunde, how have you leveraged your experience in being within the national spotlight from an early age to amplify your current reach as a leader?
I mean, I think one of the big things is actually entering into the industry that I saw so many issues with. And so after undergrad, I actually ended up going to journalism school and actually specialized in documentary film. And so the reason why I did this is because the media, whether that be for entertainment or news, really controls and has so much power with dictating public perceptions about people that look like us, about dictating what's trending, and what people are paying attention to. Because at the end of the day, people go to the same news sources over and over again to learn things. So if they're publishing stuff and you just keep seeing it, you're going to click on it. And so I really entered this industry realizing that it's so much power within it that often, you know, kind of goes overlooked. And so in doing that, I wanted to really reflect and think, okay, I saw an issue with how I was represented as, you know, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps. You can do this too. Not by all news outlets, I want to say. It was just, I wanted to make sure that that wasn't a misconception, that people looked towards my story or other individuals like myself or Chelsea and say, see, they did it, why can't you? So I wrote something for it, for The Atlantic about this. And I looked at my story and my brother's story and what happened when he was incarcerated, what happened when he was shot, and compared our stories and said, look, if there would have been more resources and investment to him, this is the proof. Like, we had the same resources, we had the same household, the same schools. There's literally no difference in our upbringing, but this is the path he took, which is the far more common path for individuals from my area. If we're talking about Black males in Oakland, it's over a 33% chance that we're going to be incarcerated at one point in our lives. It's not over a 33% chance that we're going to go to a top university. And so what should be getting more media time? The story that's more common. But why is that so often overlooked? Because nobody's actually looking past the surface level and looking at all the different parts of our society that are actively playing a role in this and making this the case. When it's systemic, it's, people kind of shy away from it. But if you can point to these individual things that make headlines. And the same thing with documentary film. I feel like that's just another realm to kind of go a little deeper in that and just tell people's stories and be able to see people face to face, hear them speak, and connect on that level. And so, so like currently right now, I'm like, okay, in this media role, what can I do to build off of this? So like I'm working on a book, I'm finishing up my book proposal, and been working with agents to try and, get that deal and put that out there. Even the work that I'm doing right now with police misconduct and looking at the history of Oakland, it's so much rich history there that majority of folks don't even know exists, and majority of folks don't even understand happen and is responsible. Like for youth my age, it's like we came up under a federal consent decree and having federal oversight over our police department. Like what more reform in the current system can you get than having federal oversight for the past 17 years formally, but really like 21 years. And so looking into that and telling that story from a perspective of somebody who's dealt with it, I'm no stranger to police misconduct. I'm no stranger to cases of driving while black or walking while black, because at the end of the day, I am who I am. I look like what I look like, and I'm subject to the same racial profiling regardless of a degree from or educated or where I work at. And so I said that to say, I think, it's one of those things where if you see an issue and you have the power to have an impact to change it, regardless of what scale it's on, if it's local or city-wide, or if it's statewide or nationwide or international, I kind of feel like you should do all that you can in your power to have that impact. And so, I guess that's how I got to where I am now and what I'm currently working on, and just how that all kind of links together.
Right. What I heard you say was that you take your job seriously in making sure that stories are told with authenticity and that are impactful to all audiences that will come across it.
Exactly. And then just to build off of that too, just one more thing I'll mention. So after I finished journalism school, I worked for the Columbia Journalism Review, which is it's basically like a media critic. We write about the news industry, the issues we see with it, what's going right, and just, write response pieces to that. And one of the big things I was focusing on, and I'm still building on in addition to the work I'm doing, is I had a lot of issues with the way we report on crime and criminal activity in our communities. And so one of the active things that I'm working on is like, if one of y'all right now, or let me not even put that energy towards y'all. If somebody were to go outside right now and they were to, somebody came up to you and tried to rob you or something, you defended yourself, and let's say the police just came when you were defending yourself and you get charged with assault. If the media were to write so-and-so charged with assault and battery, and I should say so-and-so arrested and charged with this, you go, luckily it got caught on camera, all charges dropped in court, that digital footprint still exists, right? And there's no tool for you to actually, there's no formal way for you to actually request that this gets removed. So that, of course, also disproportionately affects our communities, because another thing is like, let's say you do go, you do something and you serve time for it and you get out. And the whole point is like, okay, if the justice system works how people say it is, you're supposed to, pay your debts to society, reform, and get out. That's part of the reason why in so many states, like over 30 states, you have ban-the-box policies when it comes to applying for jobs. However, if you were arrested for something that you did jail time for or prison time for, chances are there will be some media trail of that. Therefore, when somebody Googles your name, that pops up. So a lot of times these ban-the-box policies, when you don't have to disclose that you have a felony record on a job application, are undercut by the fact that there's no way for you to formally request that these articles about you get removed. So how can the media do a better job at ensuring that, A, if you're falsely accused or falsely arrested of something, you can clear that trail, and B, if you did something and you, served time, reformed, and that's a whole nother conversation we can get to about prison and everything, but it makes no sense to have a ban the box policy when the first thing an employer is going to do is Google your name, and the first thing that's going to pop up if you have a felony record is probably that. And so it's ongoing things, and I'm just thinking about it in relation to how it affects us, because I'm thinking about this too of when my brother was released from when he was released from prison and he's applying to jobs in places, it's difficult because he has a felony on his record. When people Google his name, it comes up this big federal sting operation and all these things, but it's like that's not even reflective of the reality of what happened. And so there's a lot of ways that the media, not just perceptions of folks, but also impacts folks economically, because that's a detriment. And socially, you have a friend or somebody you're trying to meet with, whatever it may be, and they look you up and they see arrested and charged with assault. This person might be crazy, but that's not even telling the story of what happened. And so anyways, I'm very much wrapped up into this. I can go on and on about it, but that's just another point I wanted to make.
So, Chelsea, for you, I'm curious to know, and I'm sure the audience also wants to hear, how have you leveraged your experiences as a founder of multiple game-changing companies and being on the front lines of national movements? How have all of those experiences amplified your reach as a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I'm getting to a point where I've become like increasingly more and more unapologetic. And what I mean by that is, at first, when I was doing social impact work, and I would say like even as we could even go like as early as like college, right? I think that being young, but also like having these experiences, working in the Obama White House. I worked in the Obama White House when I was like 19, to then going on to work for a company on social impact strategy. It was like the reason why I was actually offered the job was because of my experiences doing social impact work. And so it was a new position that was actually created for me at the company. And so I think in that way, there was like a lot of responsibilities, but also not a lot of opportunities to be present at the table. And I think in that same way, it has gotten to a point in my activism and just my leadership journey where like I'm done first and foremost asking for permission for anything. And if I don't feel as though I am a part of a space where I'm able to not only amplify my voice, but also the voices of all of the other people who rely on me to do this work and who should also be present at this table, then I'm not going to be there. And I'd rather just build my own. And so I think that's what happened with even Freedom March NYC. And I'm so grateful for the past experiences that I've had of building businesses and organizing events and just like mobilizing people and creating digital content as a way to really engage with our generation, who very much so obviously like operates in the digital space, because all of those experiences have helped us in being able to, grow Freedom March NYC so rapidly. And I think that a lot of people were surprised by the fact that it was 2 Black women co-founders and then 2 other lead organizers who had managed to raise over $50,000 in like 3 weeks, who had like built up a business ally council, who had like led thousands of people. And it's like, no, when you have experience and when you create opportunities for people who are directly impacted by this work to lead, then they will do that. And it's when you disenfranchise and you create, right, these blockades and limits on what our youth can do and what you show them that they can do, that we create a stagnation, right, within our own society around movements and things that need to be done. So when we were on the front lines and we were seeing that all of this funding from companies was going to organizations who had already said that they have maxed out right on their funding goals, or who you're just donating to scholarship funds just to say that you're doing something because your competitor donated to this older civil rights organization, then you're not actually interested in creating anti-racist efforts and messaging and also sustainably supporting this work. You're just really more so focused on how can I not look like I'm a part of the problem. And so I think in that same way, like when we've been approached by brands, because I've worked at companies, because I've worked in the nonprofit space, we can say like, no, this is what we're not doing. And like, we are holding these companies to account. And I think that they are always so surprised by how knowledgeable we are in this space and the ways in which we are able to do that. And even with media, when we were first on the ground during Freedom March NYC, this was at the time, and this speaks to what Tunde was talking about earlier, the narrative in the media was around the looting and the rioting. Nobody was talking about justice for George Floyd and really interrogating why is it that we have not arrested these officers, and why is it that it takes thousands of people to be on the ground mobilizing 50 states to protest in order for us to arrest some officers that, truth be told, should have been arrested and convicted by now. And that's just quite frank, right? And then in that same way, when we're looking at even justice for Breonna Taylor, it's been over 100 days and still, right, the police force instead would rather arrest protesters versus arresting police officers. And so I think for us, when we talk to the media, it's really important that we continue to center the message. And I think that's how we've been gaining so much traction in this work, through being able to be on Forbes, right, New York Mag, Anderson Cooper, I have an interview that I did with him. And in that same way, you know, it really is just about how do we make sure that we are creating spaces for our youth to lead so that we don't have to say any more names, and so that we can create more systems that are inclusive and have these intersecting conversations around not only Black boys, but Black girls and Black trans and et cetera. And I don't think that the media is nuanced enough for that. So shout out to Tunde for doing that work, because I know it is not easy. They have tried us many times. So we definitely need you in there. And in that same way, you know, I think that it's just about really as a Black woman personally, just standing in my own leadership and my truth and my story and my authenticity, because that's the only way that I'm going to be able to stand in my power to affect change in the way that I need it to be affected in. What I will say is that for me, I think what I've realized is that I don't like being told what social impact looks like from those who aren't directly impacted by it and understand the severity and the importance of it. And for me, just like in general, I think when we're talking about corporate social responsibility, that I think that corporations need to take a standpoint. Like, I think a lot of companies will care about social issues up until the point that it impacts their bottom line. I think that you have to make the decision that we are going to focus on people. And if that will then compromise the bottom line, then we are okay with doing that, because we understand the direction that this world is heading in and our responsibility as a company to be a part of that conversation. So in the same way, when we've been doing, like, we worked with a lot of influencers over these past couple of weeks, and even a lot of allies who are white allies who've supported this work. Shout out to so many of our allies who pull up. And they've been saying, you know, when I post Black Lives Matter content on my feed, like, I lose thousands of followers. You know, these are people with like over 500K followers, et cetera. And they're like, it's crazy how much people disengage with the conversation. And I think more so than anything, that's telling, right, of what it really takes to be a leader and to stand on these issues and what you believe in. And sometimes, yeah, it is going to take people no longer following you, no longer supporting the brand. But I always say that when you are unapologetic and you stand in your truth, then your tribe will find you, and the people who should support your work will support your work, and those who don't right now, eventually they'll come on board, right? Because again, Martin Luther King was not praised as a saint in the 1960s. He was in the same category as Malcolm X, a problem. And so in that same way, look at us 50 years later, talking about every single Black History Month, it's a Martin Luther King quote that we start and end with, right? So in that same way, I think that brands need to pull up, and I think that leaders need to pull up to really do this work.
How do we go from one, identifying the issue, to the next step, which is doing something about it? So what's needed in that middle ground to get someone up and ready to actually lead?
Yeah, so to me, I always say that leadership is more so a journey and not necessarily a destination. Like, I feel like I've been on a leadership journey all my life, you know, because every single point in your life is a lesson that you learn that helps you for that next chapter. And so when I was working at the White House, I was like, this is incredible, you know, like, I had thought I had defied the odds, this is great. And then you get to the White House and you realize, wow, there's still so much work that needs to be done. Time for me to go back into my community and do it. same way with We Believe, right? The work that I did, and I'm always, going to be incredibly proud of the work that we've done with We Believe in our chapters. But if you told me a year from now that I'd be on the front lines leading thousands of people in New York City and on Forbes and this, that, talking about the work that we're doing, like, I would have called you a liar. I'd be like, no, that's just not what's going to happen. In fact, before I was even protesting on the front lines, I was home just like everybody else. And my friends would be like, can we do at least like a little quarantine No, I rebuke thee. We are not doing that. Like, that was me. To now, it's like crazy, like a complete transformation on how I've been in this pandemic. Don't get me wrong, still wearing my mask on the front lines, hand sanitizer, all of that. But in that same way, I think it goes to show you that I always say that, like, leadership isn't about being prepared. It's about the preparation that comes as you fall into that role and your responsibility in that role. And so the best thing that you can always do is listen to your voice and make sure that you are seizing those opportunities and you are seizing those moments to really stand in your truth and your power. And so I didn't go out on the front lines May 30th with the knowledge that we were going to create Freedom March NYC and we were going to raise all of this capital to do that. And we were going to launch a youth-led civil rights organization in New York. Like, I went out like, I can't believe that they're talking about the looting and rioting. That's crazy. Like, okay, so we're going to go out and show them that it's not about the looting and rioting. It's about something else. So the media only wants to show the looters and the rioters. That's great. We're going to make sure we're out here delivering the message as protesters, because we know that in every movement, and when you are educated, and I'm not talking about college educated, I'm not talking about high school educated, I'm not even talking about middle school. I'm talking about when you know your history. And that's power, and no one can take that away from you. And I think that's really important, because even when we talk about our education systems, they don't want us to know the history. And so in that way, when you know your history, you know your role in movements in times like this, to make sure that you are present and you are bearing witness to history. And that's why we went on the ground. And that's why we made sure that we delivered the message that y'all need to release the protesters that are in One Police Plaza, because this is actually illegal and you're violating their First Amendment rights. Mm-hmm. And we know that there are movements that show exactly what's going to happen to elected officials, okay, who don't stand on the right side of history. And so we went out there with the utmost conviction, and we were a righteous cause, and we believe in good trouble. And I have friends that have, done their 24-hour time in jail and are back on the ground, and so we are doing this work, and we are committed to doing this work. And I think what's even more telling is the fact that we've honestly always been doing this work. So we will continue to do that. So in that same way, that's my feelings on leadership. That's my feelings on what it means to be a leader. Even when the cameras are off, we're still going to be here. Shout out to the cameras, though, for amplifying the message. But even when y'all are gone, the work still needs to continue.
Wonderful.
But what I will also add, because I think it's important, when we talk about activism, I'm also a strategist. The reason why I say this is because I would not recommend everyone go quit their job. Please don't do that. I always have to caveat this, because I've seen a lot of creatives, a lot of entrepreneurs, et cetera, not have a strategic game plan when it comes to like following their passion, when it comes to like thinking things through. The reason why I left my corporate job last year is because I knew that my businesses were falling in line the way that they needed to, and I had built a network and a platform for myself where I was able to do that. And so in that same way, I would say, never forget, as you are working towards your passion as well, the strategy behind it. And the reason why I think Freedom March NYC, again, was so successful in its early iterations, because obviously there's also a lot of organizing groups that are on the ground in New York City. Not all of them have the same message, the same platform, and have received the same attention, right, as Freedom March. But I think it's because of our experiences, as well as my co-founder and I, because my co-founder also works in social impact strategy and has worked in organizing years before we even founded Freedom March, right? And so I think it's also like preparation meets opportunity meets a moment where you really need to think about how you want to create sustainable impact from that. And so all of that to say, if you are creative, continue to step in your passion, step in your purpose and be unapologetic, but also like understand that it really is a long game. You know, it's like a marathon, it's not a sprint. So think through your battles, because truth be told, if that was the case, then I would have left my corporate job by maybe 6 months in versus giving it like a year and a half. So I really think it's kind of like telling of the importance of also timing in your leadership and, you know, entrepreneur journey.
Right. So I hear passion meets practicality meets opportunity meets skill set, right? Because you guys were training for this moment.
Yeah. So again, it was like very unpredictable, but I would just say that because honestly, I had committed that I wasn't going to start any more businesses. Like actually, Freedom March NYC, legally, if I think about it, like as an incorporation, this would make it like my third business. I'm 23. Did I want 3 businesses? No, not really. I was fine with my 2. And so I think that what I'm more so saying is that just be smart, because just be smart about things and just think things through. And honestly, truth be told, I don't consider Freedom March NYC necessarily a business. I think of it through my activism, but at the same time, you have to be responsible for the sustainability of something. And as a strategist, I have to recognize, okay, if we want this to be sustainable, then we need to make sure bank accounts, we have to think through funding, we have to, you know, like board of directors, like all of these things that come with creating something sustainable. But so all of that to say, yes, agree, but also I don't want people to think that this was something that I was plotting on for years. Actually, really wasn't. It just happened. But in that way, I think that when you know, and when you know that you're called to do something, you also know, and you can step into that.
Okay, great. Tunde, do you have anything to add? How do you go from that idea or that site to I'm doing it?
I think for me, the first step is so in the realm of like media and journalism and things, I think, you have to be prepared, as Chelsea said, but of course, in another way, you have to know your history. You have to be aware of the laws. You just have to be educated about whatever topic that you're writing about, that you're making a film about, that you're doing a podcast about. And from there, you just have to make that first leap of like, okay, I'm comfortable with my knowledge. I'm comfortable with my skill set, and you just have to start doing it. I mean, you know, you can buy another camera or buy another lens or a lighting kit or this and that, you know, just do all those things in preparation, but just know there's always going to be a better technical side if that's something that plays a role. And you're always going to be hopefully more intelligent and more knowledgeable about something tomorrow than you were today. So there's never technically a right time to start, but make sure that you have that base level of comfortability of like, okay, cool. I know that I'm not going to say something that's completely inaccurate and just get torn apart by the media or anything. I'm on that level. And so write something, publish it, and also just be open to constructive criticism. I mean, at the end of the day, you know that whatever you're doing, whether it be organizing marches or writing or films or, you know, publishing pieces, there are going to be folks who disagree with you. There are going to be folks that agree, and that middle ground, and, and just about your logistics of how you're handling things. And so actually be open to reimagining and reconstructing things based on the feedback that you get. And I guess I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, right. I was just saying, so keeping an idea of flexibility around your idea, whatever it is, to be able to adapt to feedback, demand, or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Please continue.
And I was just going to add, in addition, especially in this time, this is something that Chelsea talked about a bit already, but we're in a time where I don't want to say social justice is trendy, but we're in a time where a lot of businesses know that, as you said, their bottom line, their economic impact can be harmed if they don't post something about, in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and George Floyd or different things. And it's also just a time where you have to be aware of who is doing it because they do have a sincere interest, and who is doing it because they're pandering to. And so I've had to, like how Chelsea said, I've had to turn down opportunities from journalism employers who, I had a job offer on the table with a big place, but a report came out and said they were paying Black folks and women $10,000 less annually. That's not, and you can publish all the articles you want now that this is a trendy thing about, how important Black lives are and all these things. But if a 15-year study showed on average you were paying folks $10,000 less that look like me, what do you really stand for? And that's for, in any industry, that's the case. I mean, in journalism and media, we've seen, they had the trending thing, Black at LA Times, and they've had Black at plenty of media organizations. It's the same thing as corporate America. You look at the places that folks employ. In journalism, it's a little different because like in LA, it was like the county is over 30% Black, but they had like, I don't know, under 5% or something. Don't quote me on this, but I think it was under 5% Black staff. And it's like, how do you expect the realities of the communities that you're represented to be reflected in your work if the staff that's covering them is not reflective of the community they're following? And so it's one of those things where it's difficult because you may come across some opportunities that for your own individual self-gain in terms of, I don't come from hella money. I'm the youngest out of 6. My dad didn't go to college. My mom was a school teacher for the majority of her lives. And so, that's one of the things we have to weigh. I have to make my own economic well-being, but I also have to maintain that level of, okay, morally, what sits right with me? And am I feeding into a system that's actually perpetuating this systemic inequality that we're fighting against? Or am I playing a full active role in, trying to dismantle the system? And all of these things are tied together because I don't just think of myself as like, oh, I do journalism, media. I do plenty of other things that have to do with education and, visibility and representation, even in fashion and things. And so, right, I just wanted to make sure I added that portion of that, of like, it's such an interesting time that we're in because in the journalism media industry, there are new grants. So for what I'm covering, I submitted my application to this fellowship in January before anything, but I already knew I was reporting on police misconduct in Oakland because regardless of what got thrown into the national spotlight, this is an issue that I've faced my entire life. I've been in the car with my dad as a 10-year-old, I recall getting pulled over and the officer's not even giving a ticket, just pulling up on the side of us, laughing at us and pulling off. One of my good friends from middle school, his dad got killed by Oakland Police Department back in 2009. And just this past 2 weeks, an article came out about the report that they concealed about his death and came out about him being shot in the back. And my bad, trigger warning for folks, I should have said that before. But my point being, as a kid, this is just what my exposure to stuff was. It was no trigger warning for us at 10, 11, 12 years old. This is just the experience we lived. And so we have to balance these things.
You both are truly accomplished leaders in your respective industries. And here at Mint, we want to thank you for your work and for your time and all that you're doing for your communities and the communities and what you're doing. Would you guys like to let us know how to get in touch with you, how to access some of your projects? If you'd like to take the moment to share it with us.
So I can definitely be found on freedommarchnyc.com if you're interested in learning more about our organization and the work we've been doing around this movement. And then my own personal social media platform at the Chelsea Miller on Instagram. That's where I give all updates on everything.
Thank you.
Just my social media handles for me, I'm active on Twitter at Akintunde Ahmad and Instagram as well. Right on Instagram, I'm posting a lot of local things regarding fundraisers and, some of the education initiatives that we're going to be rolling out pretty soon. And on Twitter, it's a lot more, talk about race, politics, economics, the overlap of those. And I have links to my work on both of those platforms and sites. And so if you check there, you can see some of the stuff I've written.
We'll also have the links on their respective bio pages for the conference. And thank you again for you both. This is Sherron Pearson, co-founder and CTO of Mint. And thank you again for joining us for the 2020 Empowerment Conference. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Have a great day, okay?
You too.
You too.
Bye.